Welcome to Forward Obsessed, where we talk to breakthrough business leaders and rising entrepreneurs about their journeys, origin stories, and aha moments.
On this episode of Forward Obsessed, we sat down with Lucas Loeffler. Lucas is the founder and CEO of QuickFrame, which he exited to Mountain Media. You might know Mountain Media because of Ryan Reynolds and some of the really provocative things that are happening in the ad tech, content tech, all the cool tech spaces. So on today's conversation, you're going to learn about what it means to be a first-time founder, what it means to have less than $1,000 in your bank account, focused on some of the challenges that life brings about. So we're going to see the ups, we're going to see the downs of what it means to be an entrepreneur, from the trials, the tribulations, the pivots and pitfalls that you know us so well. So you're not going to want to miss this episode. We're going to hear about all the juicy details, from fundraising to what it's like leading a team of people through a COVID pandemic, which we know is such a big thing that we've all had to face. So I want to just say thanks again for tuning in to Forward Obsessed. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. Your contribution is there. It sounds like a couple of clicks. It really helps us continue to have amazing guests on the show and keep doing what we're doing. So thanks so much for tuning in, everybody, and stay Forward Obsessed.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Forward Obsessed. Today we have with us Lucas Loeffler, founder of QuickFrame. We're going to get right into it. We like to start early years, so might go to your childhood, your upbringing. We try to find a thread that led you to becoming an entrepreneur. Sometimes we find it, and sometimes we just go on a bottomless mission. So, Lucas, tell us from the top, like, where were you born? What was life like? Your parents? I mean, start any way you'd like.
So I was born in New York City in May of 1988. I was very blessed growing up, just an amazing childhood, amazing, loving, supporting family. And from the moment I came out of the womb, I was a little bit of an instigator. And so I think, the extent to which that thread led to entrepreneurship, I can't necessarily speak to, but I was always, I was always planning, I was always scheming. Most of them were fairly benign in nature, but as I got older, they started to include, obviously parties. There was always sort of some kind of, kind of amateurish scam in the background. Nothing illegal by any stretch, but like I was definitely the guy who was pulling people together and being like, look, Timmy's parents are away this weekend. What are we going to do? How are we going to finance the party? Who's coming? Are we selling tickets? Are we selling merch? How are we doing it?
I just party promotion. I feel like that could be a thread that goes to entrepreneurship.
Definitely a thread.
Big time.
Were your parents entrepreneurs?
They work for themselves, so I guess technically very much, entrepreneurial in nature. Certainly my father. My mom was a model growing up, left her hometown like 16 years old, always was incredibly independent, had me when she was super young, my sister as well, who's 5 years younger. And so like just seemed to understand what it meant to be an adult and a mother and somebody who was responsible from the outset. My dad wanted to be Elvis or James Brown. I think he once shook James Brown's hand, didn't wash his hand for like 2 weeks, from Carlisle, PA. Farm town kid who just like was reading the Rolling Stone magazine, was like, that's what I want to do, and got in the car, drove to New York City and started dialing for dollars. And so I think a lot of that spirit probably came from him, but they were always very supportive. Like I think they were aware that they had a little bit of an instigator on their hands. And so, there were even occasions where like they would apologize to me when they caught me throwing a party, because they knew like the amount of coordination and effort and, fibbitry, if not outright lies, I think were told to get it going. But nobody got hurt. We all survived, had a lot of laughs, a lot of fun.
Rule makers and rule breakers. That seems to be one of the things I see coming up with a lot of the guests, is like the mindset of the entrepreneur. I was joking around the last episode saying like, is entrepreneurship a mental illness? And it was just sort of kind of a funny joke, but curious to hear your thoughts on that. It sounds like you weren't the type of person to go on a linear journey. So am I sort of picking up on that in terms of like that?
That's a polite way of putting it. Yeah, I think the family would definitely agree with that. I was never easy. I think I never thought of myself so much as a rule breaker, but it definitely was, sort of the pretense of like everything we were doing, that like the rules were kind of secondary to whatever our objective was. And if that meant like, we had to fib a little bit or, embellish a little bit, and that's what we did. And I probably dragged a few of my buddies along who may have been a bit straighter, looking back. But I definitely agree with the sort of mental insanity that comes with being an entrepreneur, just based on how crazy the risk is. And that tends to reflect, you often hear like substantially younger entrepreneurs speak about risk very differently than more experienced entrepreneurs. And so, in many ways, ignorance, at least for me, was like an asset.
Yeah.
And I just didn't really think about all the implications or, repercussions of, starting to bet really big on yourself and asking the people that support you and love you to do the same. And now, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, you're like, it was really lucky to get out of the casino and to be able to do so on your own terms with people that you really respect and admire. And I think in the beginning, it was like, oh yeah, I'll do it. I'll figure it out, and had no idea how to do it or how to figure it out. Or, I very much look back on my childhood as like the structure that gave me the confidence to be unstructured.
I like that. So your father was a dream chaser.
Still is.
Is he?
I like to think so. I think he'd probably say the same thing.
What does he do? Or what did he do? Or what has he done?
So he's a music executive. He's been a producer. He writes and produces music for television and film projects, most significantly. And he now buys publishing catalogs in conjunction with his company, BMG, which is the Bertelsmann family. And so he goes after like heritage artists, Earth, Wind, and Fire, who kind of have this amazingly iconic brand, obviously massive publishing catalog, and are still really current, and their fans are fanatical. And, so he travels the world listening to music and rubbing shoulders with artists, and is substantially cooler than his son.
So, but he was a dream chaser. He wanted to be Elvis, and he found a way into that industry, and he found himself a niche. And I'd imagine, I've read stories about this whole world of buying publishing catalogs is super lucrative. I mean, people are paying, didn't like Bieber buy somebody's?
Oh yeah,
yeah, and like everybody's buying everybody else's publishing. Right?
The new annuity.
Yeah, it's the new annuity. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
What's I think interesting though is, and I see this throughout your journey, is creativity and overcoming hardship strike me as something that came through your family, right? So clearly your father, very, very creative. Your mother obviously had kids when she was very young, had to sort of go out on her own at a young age, right? Figure shit out. So I'm sort of seeing the creativity, the resilience, the ability to overcome that. Reflecting back now, obviously, as an adult and someone who's done a lot, congrats on all your success. Have you ever looked back to say, wow, look at how these moments in my life really inspired my journey? It sounds like your parents were very supportive of you being a little bit of a disruptive type.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily know if it was sort of the plan was hatched that way, but they absolutely only knew how to be one thing, which was just like that backboard of support and love that, even when they were really frustrated with me, which was probably weekly, I think they were always kind of reinforcing or echoing that they understood who I was and who I was trying to be, which, certainly in your formative years is like, you're stretching, you're making up as you go. Still feel like I'm making up as I go along, but just with a bit more experience. And so, I think the boarding school experience was one that pulled forward a lot of, certainly connections. Like you're meeting people from all over the world, not just all over the town. That was a big thing, and something that's become, certainly a thread in my life. And that, like, I have such an eclectic group of friends and interests, and I think that, sort of characteristic has made me more creative and open-minded and progressive in terms of my thinking, not just in terms of problem solving, but like recruiting.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer in recruiting different skill sets, different experiences. At QuickFrame, we had, at the height, over 80 full-time employees, and the age range, I'd always joke, spanned from like, we had an advisor who was in his, basically turning 80, late 70s. And then we had, advisors who were, hadn't graduated from college yet. Right. And so bringing all those people together was a massive asset, and people, just kind of like, very much, captured a lot of perspective that they wouldn't have otherwise had without being able to go to lunch, sit in a meeting, be on a call with someone who, forget being from a different city or college, is from a different decade or several. And I think you only really appreciate that looking back.
Love it. I'm so curious, how does a rule breaker, a defiant one, last in boarding school? I'm a public school New York City guy, so I just picture boarding school being very strict, and you send your kid there to like military camp. How did you what was that like for you?
You definitely learned how to charm your way out of trouble a bit.
Okay.
You know, I think at my worst, I think I still benefited from a really great network of teachers and coaches who recognized that I had a very positive and ethical spirit, and that there was a lot of work to be done on the rest, but they were willing to put in that work. And so I think I definitely had my share of detentions and being sent home and getting in trouble, whether it was with the school or my family or my friends. But it always sort of had this this baseline of very positive energy and support. And candidly, it's something that not every other kid got, and I'm sure it took a lot of luck. And maybe not every teacher looking back would say, "Hey, I should have given Lucas that break or several." But I definitely made the best of it, and have a lot of long-time relationships from that experience, and wouldn't trade it for anything.
So post boarding school, you went on to college. You were an athlete?
I was. I played football for several years in college until I had a shoulder injury, which prohibited me from playing, and also opened up massive opportunity for me to and it's a sobering experience when your entire life is dedicated to at that age, it seems like the only thing that matters, and you're exercising, and you start to really develop a discipline for longer term objectives, which I think is critical in any sport, team or otherwise. Obviously, the team aspect is massively beneficial, in my opinion. You learn how to collaborate, how to apologize, how to be there for somebody, how to cover for somebody, all those kind of softer skills, which, we try to recruit for professionally. But had a great experience playing football until I didn't, and then had all this free time to basically do whatever I wanted. And that was really scary, but that also helped to ignite this flame that was just, a never ending stream of curiosity. And so I put myself around friends and mentors who were starting businesses or trying to, or dreaming of, and I just started attending meetings with them. And then over time that kind of morphed into, oh, maybe I could be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
This isn't so much of a pipe dream, it's just going to require a tremendous amount of hard work and discipline. And, at least now I have the time to do it. So that's how it all started.
I want to go back for a second. So I'm not an athlete. Everyone on the show knows that. But
I've actually seen you play sports.
So the question for you
I laugh. I hurt my back sleeping.
No, laugh away, right? We all get old. So, but the question, did you have dreams of going to the NFL type of thing? Were you that kind of an athlete, or where it was when you had that injury, it was a life-altering event for you, or was sports just one of the other things you were going to do in your life?
I don't think I had, it's a really good question, and one I've thought a lot about, certainly then. I don't think I had a longer-term aspiration of playing professionally. I was, smart enough and practical enough to recognize just, the risk associated with, committing to, something so ambiguous.
Got it.
Having said that, I certainly trained to be the best I possibly could be. And, the highs and the lows all reflected someone who really cared. And I do remember feeling the pain. It's very similar to losing a big deal professionally.
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time on years working on, you're telling the people you love and who support you that this is going to happen or could happen. And, you're the one who has to pick yourself off the floor, or, maybe with some help,
yeah.
When it doesn't work out. And so it definitely didn't impact how much I cared, but it was definitely not the long term.
The reason I asked that question, Lucas, specifically is that I think a lot about just the letdown that happens when something, here you see
the
this,
door closes.
The door closed, and you're like, I'm not an athlete anymore. Or maybe that moment happened where you're like, I can't play football. That's a big part of my identity. I know a lot of folks that have come on the show or listened to the show have told us about, mental health challenges that they're facing. So I have to imagine it was a bit of an emotional letdown when this happened for you, just given how much of your life you spent training to be in that physical condition, irrespective of your future aspirations. When that happened, what's some advice that you would give to somebody on, clearly I can hear it just from talking to you in a couple minutes, you've got a work ethic, you've got a drive, you've got a vision with whatever you've done. I can just see that about you. When you got knocked on your ass with that moment, you're like, oh, I'm hurt now. How did you get back up and keep going? How did you cultivate that attitude? Because that's something I think people get a lot of value from.
Yeah, this is an even harder one to answer. I mean, I think the identity piece is really significant. I think that's true of all athletes, but true of any, profession. You see this with, I often, characterize retirees as like the best source of talent on the planet because, a year ago they were at the top of their game. Now, just because they're not working full time, somebody says they're worth 10 cents on the dollar. And I love that arbitrage value because I'm like, these guys have so much experience, have so much to teach, and are already retired. So they're not actually like seeking the same short-term financial benefit as somebody else. And so I'd bring that back to the sports experience and that like, yeah, it's intimidating to redefine who you are. And also so much about who people recognize you as has to do with an identity that's gone. And so I think that probably help, sort of catalyze some wounds, which I, in many ways, still hold on to, which is like, hey, look, I feel like I'm somebody who can reinvent myself at any given point in my life, whether that's like becoming a husband or a father or a stay-at-home, supporting father. And my identity is going to shift over time as I played these different roles as a man. And I think that it started with recognizing that like you got to grow up, and this is part of that period of time. And playing sports doesn't define who you are; you define who you are.
Love that.
But that was a process for sure, and I think that it happened when I was young enough that I felt like I had a lot of real estate to experiment and fail, which I did plenty of. But it does start with that like kind of self-talk in the mirror around like, hey, what do I want to be? Do I want to be known as like the football player? And I can remember going to even some of the senior night speakers. I remember being like, if I'm up here talking like this, like no disrespect to these guys, but it was like, if that was like the best time of my freaking life.
Al Bundy, poke high football.
Yeah, I'm like, I was like, it's just.
We all know one.
I
scored 4 touchdowns in the second. It was like, you're talking about high school, bro? Come on.
Yeah, I just was like, there's so much more. I was like, that's awesome. I love, shooting the breeze about the game, as much as the next guy, but it was just, something that I remember looking back on being like, there's so much more to life. And I'm excited to stub my toe figuring it out.
I love that. So let's push us forward now into, you had a pretty prolific internship with, obviously an organization like Fortress Investment Group, right? And coming out of that, you had a 6-figure offer that, was put in front of you, which at that time, at that age was a lot of money back then, right?
Yeah.
And
Still is.
Yeah, still is, right? For some people. And I think you turned it down. And from what my research says is that was a little bit of a defining moment in the family gathering. So take us through that, take us back to that point, and then how did that catalyze just some of what came next in the world of Lucas?
Yeah. So that was a tough one. Going back to your point about, entrepreneurship being this like mental disease. There's definitely a little bit of that. And I had an amazing experience at Fortress, amazing experience with the people I worked for and the mentors who, went out of their way to take care of me and to teach me. And, that weighed on me a lot when I turned that offer down. But part of what gave me the confidence, naively as it may have been, is that I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to be my boss. And part of the offer felt like, not like a favor, but I knew I wasn't being recruited because I was better than every single person who had applied. Now, maybe I would have turned into, that type of operator for Fortress, but I just didn't see it then. And I felt really confident that if I committed to something that I was kind of on the fence about from the outset, that over time that would compound and I would start to take out that frustration on the people I loved, the activities I, enjoyed spending time doing, and ultimately it would limit my creativity as an operator. And so
you traded privilege for possibility.
Yeah. Better said. Exactly. Privilege for possibility, or possibility, in spite of privilege.
Love that.
And so, called them up and I said, you know how I feel about you, and I'm very blessed to have worked here. And to call you a mentor and advisor moving forward, but out of respect for you and the firm and the practice, I think you got to fill this seat with somebody else. And so turned that down. And, that was the beginning of like staying on the couch at, mom's or dad's and friends' places and looking for a startup job that was going to pay you at best, less than half of that. And, from that moment on, just defined myself based on, trying to build something from the ground up and tied every incentive or, sort of economic goal in my life to that outcome. And, some days were prettier than others. but just kept going Shawshank style and made it all about learning, and, was blessed not to have any golden handcuffs, making that harder. But that was the beginning for sure.
I love that. That's sort of where I'm seeing that, like, you went from the young kid throwing the off-kilt parties to now it's like you're going to sort of really make yourself into something that is your own path and not somebody else's path that they put in front of you. So what was that next step in the journey for you? I think, it was at Identified, right?
Yeah.
And your role there was business development. And I asked that question because I think that one of the skills that I've started to see by interviewing some of these world-class leaders and entrepreneurs like yourself has been the ability to sell, whether that sell is a vision or a product or a service, seems to be one of the most important skills entrepreneurs have. So how did you get this role at Identified, and what is it about business development that started to spark and shape how you went on to build the business?
Well, I was, definitely had a kind of work crush on my still mentor, Brendan Wallace, who founded Identified, and he was an exceptional salesperson, exceptional leader, incredibly bright. But even he will tell you the Identified experience, marks a very naive portion of his, operating career. He's now one of the largest VCs in California, specifically in Los Angeles, runs Fifth Wall. And so after he sold Identified, he went on to invest in companies and has obviously remained close to me. But I can remember the early days of Identified really just being a who's who of Silicon Valley famous angels, from Draper to the rest of the, syndicate that Brendan brought on. It just seemed like everybody was like this, Stanford startup royalty. And so just being around it was incredible. And so as soon as I got the job offer, he's going to pay me $40,000. Me and a few other colleagues who were in the same cohort all literally slept on his floor for the first few weeks trying to find an apartment in San Francisco. Ended up in, corporate housing where every room had the same painting in the same place. And so, needless to say, we didn't have a lot of girls over, but it was perfect for what we needed, and had an amazing experience. Honestly, just like throwing crap at the wall, trying to figure out what stuck. And I think the best part of that experience for me was the business development title just being sort of a made up characterization of like, hey, go figure out how to make this viable from a commercial standpoint. And so that was the sort of eureka moment for me when I was like, oh, all these brilliant minds have no idea how to make this a business. And so as soon as the doors closed, you had no shortage of, intellectual capital in the room and experiential capital. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to pick up the phone. It's a B2B SaaS business, and call somebody on the other end and get them to give you money, and do so at a forecastable frequency that is going to actually justify all these people who put in millions and millions of dollars. And as basic as that premise was, I had just never really seen the nuts and bolts of how the sausage was made. So I was like, really excited to watch that come together. I don't think any of us hit our sales objectives or numbers, but we closed the first few deals in the company's history. And so the, most fulfilling part of that journey and experience was like the experimentation value and the, development of what ended up becoming product market fit for Identified.
Awesome.
And this was just super familiar to you because, if I look back and I track back the thread that I told you we looked for, I see you as a young teenager figuring out how to finance parties and just figuring out how to pull the pieces together and the money.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a thread in certain types of entrepreneurs that I think is really evident. Hackers, right? Where you're trying to throw them in the deep end and just see if you can swim. And I think that, it seems like you're sort of the instigator in you takes on those challenges and says, okay, well, I just got to poke all these points and see which one moves and see if I can actually get a result or an outcome out of it.
Yeah.
So that seems to be part of who your character is, and very much so mine. I think that's how I get to achieve things, by doing the same sort of the journey through feel, right? Mm-hmm. And then also putting the right people around you. As Pete wrote a great article many years ago. We're getting fucking old now. Bridging wisdom and wonder.
Oh yeah.
Right? Old people and young people. So
Yeah.
Talked a lot about that.
Yeah, no, I can share it with you offline. But basically, just to cut through it, essentially, we had a really prominent executive. She was in, let's call it the top end of her career. She wasn't retired by any means, and then she was transitioning into a new role. And she's run some of the biggest companies on the planet. And she confided in me. Again, I'm not going to out her, of course, and was just saying the ageism she was facing at that time. And so it's interesting to hear what you're saying earlier about the arbitrage on retirees. So I think that you have a sense of reverence for people that provide value irrespective of those things. So I think I can see how you would be an inspiring leader to work with and for. So that's great.
So Identified, obviously, you told us the end of the story. He sold the business and would go on to start one of the most successful venture capital firms with Fifth Wall. But you didn't stay. You left. What happened?
I went to Brendan. It was a really easy conversation. I said, look, I love it here. I'm really thankful for everything you've given me, but I want to be you. I don't want to be, the sales manager we just hired, to be our boss, who was also a great guy. And Brendan got that immediately. And it was super simple. He's like, can you stay through the end of the month? I said, of course. I was, again, naive and thinking I would just jump into another job. And that took, of course, longer than I thought it would. But I was just hell-bent on, getting into a startup that reflected a different, I think, level of operational rigor. I saw the true beginning stages, but I wanted to go to a business that had a little bit more of a developed and refined kind of sales motion so I could actually learn the mechanics of how to sell. And I got that in OpenX, which is a really successful, still around ad tech company.
Yeah.
And so they ran one of the earliest programmatic ad exchanges. There's a lot of actually interesting tidbits to their backstory.
We used to work with them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Early on, we did a lot of platform integrations with some of their stuff. And
Quantcast, OpenX.
Yeah, they had the open source ad server.
Yep.
Obviously, Tim and Jason being extraordinary executives and gone on to do other amazing things.
Great company.
Was that still in San Francisco?
That was actually New York. And then I moved back to Pasadena years later, same company, but to work out of the headquarters.
Okay.
You don't remember the travel thing we did? That we did a big thing. OpenX was like, I had a love-hate relationship with OpenX for about 2 months.
Me too.
Yeah, but thank God that it worked out. So
Me too.
So you went over to their much more robust company, a lot of rigor, a lot of process, which ties back well. I get that. That's boarding school now.
Yeah.
Right. Rules.
I needed a little bit. I was, again, the experience was, I recognized that I was going to have a hard time, taking girls on dates if I couldn't get any commission dollars or bonus or, whatever.
I can't believe living in San Francisco during that time for $45,000 a year. I mean, you're like hand to mouth right there.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah. So, and then you started in business. You went right back into business development. What do you think business development? So every person that I know that has been some type of a party promoter is either in real estate or is great at business development. What do you think? Is it just the socialness? Is it the charisma, the good time? Obviously, you would say, well, you take people and you entertain and wine and dine them, but I think it's more than that. What do you think the skill sets are that transfer?
Well, I think, you definitely need to have the ability to bring lots of different groups of people together. And so, coordinating, timelines, venues, budgets, when you've got really none of the above is like, I think the fun part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this sort of sequential thinking around, well, we need this to go right for that to go right. And that, if those two things go right, then we'll have an opportunity to do this. I think that starts with like the basic coordination of like trying to do more with less, which like party planning fits into, but like honestly, a lot of the shenanigans we did as kids fit into.
But it's clarity of vision too, right? Like one of the things that you talk about Brendan, who was a mentor, at that time, right? Just the clarity of vision to be that young in your career in life and say, you know what, I don't want to be this person. I want to be you. And I have so much respect for you. I need to go and do something because I see a bigger vision for myself. I think what the party planner can do, and I'm thinking of, some of our friends like a Steve or whatever as an example, another entrepreneur, is they have a vision for what that experience is going to look or feel like. And then because of that vision, because of that clarity of vision, both for themselves and for others, they magnetically attract people. You strike me as a super connector. David's a super connector. You're able to bring the people together, which ultimately brings together the experience and brings together the party. So I think that's
See how they're going to connect.
right. And that's what a great CEO does, right? Is creates the vision and is able to attract people around that. So speaking of vision, so now at that point, you decided that B school was going to be the thing. So how do you go from like on this quick climb, quick rise to say, you know what? I think I'm gonna switch gears, get off the on ramp of business development building to go to a school that maybe you've heard of called Wharton.
Yeah. So definitely was skeptical about getting in even after I got the letter. I can remember my dad joking that, but kind of halfway serious that once I got there, they were going to tell me it was a different Loeffler. And so I was very excited to call him the first day I checked in. I was like, no, it's me, and it's real, and until I let you guys know something's changed, I'm enrolled. And
is the paint in the dorm room is better than the paint in some of the other corporate houses?
Yes. No, I had a great experience. It saved a little bit of money at OpenX, which I promptly, probably blew on some other, combination of startup ideas that didn't go anywhere. But had a great experience. I knew that I wanted to continue to up-level in accordance with this broader vision I had of starting a business. And so thinking about, experiential capital that I didn't have, connections I didn't have, and complementary learnings that I didn't have, right? I felt like I could sell. I felt like I'd work from a, strong enough diversity of sales leaders and managers in a category, in the broader media category, which I was really excited about, the new media format, the growth of programmatic. I just felt like were general enough categories that felt really exciting to me to be at the forefront of. And so I was really grateful for that. But at the end of the day, I wanted to learn, things you just don't get exposure to as a salesperson, like, managerial accounting, wanted exposure to marketing and the actual foundational discipline of business building. And I had a lot of the actual sausage making experience, but I wanted a little bit of the classroom. And so in 2014, I went to Wharton, and my goal was to, get as much of that experience as I possibly could and do a, formal corporate internship. I think my family had aspirations that maybe I would see the light and go back to the private equity, management consulting ecosystem, which of course I did not, and had the idea for QuickFrame almost immediately, and went to Broadway Video, was our first investor, a guy named David Birnbaum. It's Lauren Michaels, what was then their quote venture fund. And so they had a portfolio of investments, which, were modest in size, but they saw so many deals as entertainment juggernauts. And David has a tremendous amount of experience as a venture capital partner himself. They were open-minded enough to, cut us a $50,000 check and let us use their office space and help kind of advise in the early stage of the business, from recruiting to positioning and all that. But it all started at Wharton, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity if, I didn't get connected to Broadway.
It's like David always says, your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
I want to ask one question, because I feel like we have to get the horse and jockey question in, which I want you to bring up the thinking on that. But did the idea for QuickFrame find you, or did you find the idea? Because one of the things we talk a lot about is it the horse? Is it the jockey? Is it the idea? Is it the problem? I want to go a little bit deeper on that. So take us through, where's the idea from QuickFrame?
So I love
this the aha moment.
Yeah, it's funny because we had an embellished version of this that was a bit more kind of kosher for corporate audiences, where I would, do a little schmooze on stage and talk about the eureka moment, but this of course was blessed from our chief marketing officer. The entrepreneurial truth is that I was experimenting on Craigslist really just as a prankster. I used to buy ads of my friends, in silly outfits or, stupid looking pictures. And I would, back then you could just annihilate the social graph and just abuse what you could effectively get referred to. And people would be like, is that blah, blah, blah? And there'd be screenshots. And of course I didn't have any money. So even spending $500 in performance marketing was, probably not the smartest thing. But even today I'll get sent screenshots of different ads we used to run on Facebook. And it all started with, honestly, just a experimentation with video at a time that was really, really, I don't want to say Wild West because it's so cliche, but the digital video landscape was just starting to dominate.
It's not the Mr. Beast world that it is today.
Correct. Yeah, by any stretch, right? And it's TikTok didn't exist. The beginnings of what would end up being vertical video, short form video, user generated video. This was the Ice Bucket Challenge timeline. The idea that UGC could be valuable was very novel at the time, and video was just so in demand. And so from OpenX experience, it was obvious that any amount of linear video was worth, 8 to 15x what other display and mobile media formats would be worth in terms of like advertising value. And so the thought was like, well, if there's so much demand, why is there not as much supply that, is capably being put in the hands of marketers? And so the aha moment was when I posted on Craigslist a like $20 bid to have somebody basically eat a series of cheeseburgers, smoke a series of cigarettes.
Pack of cigarettes.
Yeah, a pack of cigarettes was the story. Like I said, it didn't get past our chief marketing officer for the for any of like the marketing events we did. But the truth is that it was like that full pack of cigarettes this random guy in Australia smoked down to the, base. And the math blew my mind because I'm like, this guy just went out and bought cigarettes, which, cost between $0 and $20 probably.
Do you have a waiver signed?
Doesn't exactly. No documentation, no contract, no way to submit the video, no idea how or when I'm going to pay him and for what. And on my side,
limitations is past.
Yeah, you're good. Like I had 77 videos of people smoking an entire pack of cigarettes for the chance of making $20. Yeah. So the math blew my mind because I was like, hey, if I can count on some median viewership for all these videos, which I own and didn't even have to pay to own, presumably, because if we create a marketplace product, then we can invite buyers to subsidize that cost and we can share in the transaction value that throws through the marketplace. And so I just loved this idea of this IP machine. And my roommate's sitting there looking at the video of the cigarette guy, and he's like, "You see all that from this?
He didn't see the value
cigarette video." And I was like, "Oh, this is it."
You just had proof of concept.
I loved it, and so everything we did from that moment on was kind of reverse engineering the hack that was Craigslist. Right? It's like identity, transparency, all the best practice for a marketplace, right? And how do you think about price? How do you think about continuity of brand? Should other people be able to see this video? How do we know it's original? Like that all, stemmed from
how old were you?
The Craigslist experiment. I was 27, 28. I was literally going to business school, having a kind of eat, pray, love moment where I'm like, I'll do any, who knows what I'm going to do? Maybe I'm going to go work at a big corporate company. Maybe I'm going to start a company. Maybe I'll meet my co-founder here. And when I saw those videos, I was like, man, this is what I want to do. Like, this is going to work. I didn't know exactly how, but I was like, I felt really confident in the tailwinds. Yeah.
Yeah. So now where did you go from there? You went out, and at that point, did you go out and raise the 50,000?
That point, I went out, raised the 50 grand, went to that guy, David, who had written my rec for Wharton because he went to Wharton, and had him a little bit of a trap because he's like, and I'll never forget, he looks across the table and he's like, fuck, I really like this. He's like, but you're going to business school. And so that became the whole push-pull. So he was in this like quandary of being a mentor of mine, having written my rec, having got me in. And now he's like, well, you're a first-time entrepreneur I'm giving 50 grand to. I don't want to give you money to go to school. Like, are you going to do this? You're going to go to school. And so that battle took, a month or two. And then he finally got comfortable with the idea of me leaving at the end of the year. And every week that week, I came into the city on Thursday after class. We had no classes on Friday. I didn't have much of a social life, but just built the business basically.
Philly, New York. Yeah. Wow.
Did that bus a lot. I don't know if they still do it, but there was literally you could get up to New York with $10.
Peter Pan.
Yeah. Literally the ticket was like a notepad piece of paper that they just rip out and just write like a number on it. I'm like, give them cash. And then, one time I was sitting there next to somebody who had like some kind of peacock or so, like there was definitely livestock.
Those are the Peter Pan buses. Yeah, the dollar buses.
They make good dinners according to that movie recently with Sebastian Maniscalco. Did you see that?
What a great movie.
Oh man.
Yeah. I didn't
get a great watch.
I didn't get through the whole thing yet.
But yeah, it's a good one to kind of fall asleep to.
Yeah.
I think you did fall asleep to it.
You were at my house.
I downloaded.
And I'm a big Maniscalco fan. I loved his last comedy show in Vegas.
Yeah, my wife and I finally got a night off from our kid, and we go over to visit him and his wife, and we're watching it, and they're all sleeping. So we're looking at each other like, why are we sitting here? Let's just get up and leave and finish watching it. So, but yeah. So peacock moments. We'll flash that into the thing. So QuickFrame is really at this point now, you got something here.
Well, walk us through the scale. Like so where did it go from there?
I mean, I had 50 grand. I thought I was like Jeff Bezos. I was like, I'm in. I was like, this is all I need. I was like, it's real. We've incorporated. Didn't know any truly didn't know anything about what that meant, right? Like now it's like a different level of sausage making where like every single step of the process, I've got to ask somebody, what do you do next? And
you're not a tech by trade.
Nope. So. Yeah. So just, again, going back to the party planning thing, it's like, I need to find the bloom guy and, found him, a guy named Brett DiDonato, who's like one of the most exceptionally bright people I've ever met in my life. And, probably the closest thing I ever had to a co-founder at QuickFrame, and was just exceptional. He now works at Google, full stack developer, can honestly do anything. I'm quite positive of it, but, met him just on like, I think a co-founder dating site. I don't even know if it's still around. At that point you're sending thousands of emails, LinkedIn messages, etc. And, he
unpack that for me.
Liked the idea.
I want to go deeper on that for a second, because one of my big pet peeves right now, and I'm sure it's a pet peeve of yours, is people who think that they spin the slot machine 3 times and they hit the jackpot. You just said thousands of emails and different kind of co-founder dating sites.
Developer.
Yeah. So just make sure to tell people that like it's a numbers game and you got to spend the thing.
It is a numbers game and you got to spend the time. I mean, like I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, something we used to teach our sales team. It's like, I could give you $100 and ask you to, pass out hundreds to people outside, Penn Station, but you're not going to go 100%. You won't go 10%. Somebody's going to be like, why are you giving me this $100? I don't really trust you, et cetera. And so like, I think that helped reinforce the confidence that like, you're never going to be perfect. There is no, perfect equilibrium of like every human being, wanting what you have to offer, and just appreciating that like, there's a lot of rapport building and trust building that goes and humility that goes into engaging new people, especially new people that you're going to try to do something really difficult with, like a partner, co-founder, employee. And so, I think it's not just time, but also like, can you keep your mind and body in a place that's like constructive? Because recognizing like, Jeff Bezos doesn't always say like, if you're not willing to be misunderstood, don't do it, don't start. Like, I think that's an important lesson where like, you're going to go to 10 meetings or 100 meetings, and the volume has to be there, yes, but like also the stamina to make sure that like you're comfortable having absolute best case scenario, 60, 70% of those people tell you not only that like they're not interested in, but like the insinuation that you're crazy. And again, you got to be a little insane to, go through those reps in a way that still allows you to come back for dinner.
I think,
and not, be totally manic and crazy, which entrepreneurs do, I think sometimes a better job of than others. But I think you're absolutely right.
Awesome.
I think it's a matter, that's the name of the show, is Forward Obsessed, right? It's the ability to get punched and continue to move with momentum. I think the lesson that we continue to hear throughout the show, whether you're talking about early sales, PR and getting writers to cover you, or today's raising capital, or today's example of finding a co-founder, is, it takes time. You can't put your eggs in one basket. You got to go for a lot, right? This the old analogy, shoot or shoot, right? That's the only way you're going to hit, is if you have the confidence to shoot the ball. And like I just talked about it the other day with somebody that was raising capital, and I was like, what's your prospect list of investors? They were talking like 6 people, and they're like telling me that they're striking out. I'm like, I'm raising capital right now. I was like, I'm talking to 130. 130. I have a CRM that I built to cover my bases. I'm talking to 130, and by the time I hit my number, I'll probably be up to 300. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it's that same sort of thing where it's like tenacity, strength in numbers, shooting the shot, exploration. So thank you for that. That's a big lesson for you guys on Forward Obsessed.
Yeah. And I stopped you just as you were telling about the brilliant engineer friend of yours who was close to a co-founder, and now he's a full stack engineer at Google. So at that time, this is where you went from some smoking videos to now you got to build a platform. Mm-hmm. So you start to bring some of the balloon people together, like you were saying, in this case, the full stack engineer, that sort of thing. What's that like then? So you're bringing people to the table. Obviously, you don't have a ton of capital. 50K goes pretty quick, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what's the plan then at that point? How do you kind of get that flywheel spinning?
Well, that was a big thing. I remember going to Broadway and saying, can I, what should be like sort of my payment philosophy, right? I can't afford to pay this guy a, salary. And they're like, sure you can. I was like, well, explain that to me. Like, he's going to need more than 50 grand. They're like, yeah, that's right. You're going to have to start paying him a salary. You're going to have to make progress. And somewhere between the moment you start paying him and the time we're all out of money is the time we're going to need to raise more money or sell customers faster. And that kind of helped me appreciate that, like, whether I start the clock or not, the clock has started. And so
Burn, baby, burn.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Just
you had to be thoughtful about money, but I think it was more the sort of like the invisible, sand machine that was like, one kernel at a time, clicking down. And whether it's expectation from your family or from his family or friends, like, you're up against this, commercial benchmark of opportunity cost that is real. And so, that was when I started to, play on my toes a little bit more and recognize, like, all right, we're going to do this, or we're going to fail, trying to figure it out, but we're just not going to wait anymore.
So
right? There was no perfect equilibrium. It was like, we started to pay him $4,000 a month. And obviously was burning, ancillary cash around that, whether it be for design. We were very frugal. I wasn't taking a salary at the time, obviously, but, a lot of bus tickets, et cetera.
how are you sleeping during that time? I mean, besides probably not sleeping a whole ton, but
I didn't sleep very much.
Yeah.
I didn't sleep very much, candidly. I mean, everything was like, just even on that Thursday as an example, was like, I would go to class in the morning, go right to the bus. As soon as I got off the bus, we'd go to a lunch. As soon as I got out of the lunch, I would go to the office, work with him for 4 or 5 hours. Then I would go to a dinner, then I'd go to a drink. Then I'd get up and be Friday. I'd do a full day, start with a breakfast. And I did that for 6 years. And, I think, experience allows you to, to pull forward outcomes in a different, more thoughtful way, or like, you don't have to move as fast to go as far. But all I knew then was just sweat. So it was like, hey, it was the only thing I knew how to do. It was just like, I'm going to send a lot of emails. You start to get sensitive around like even the timing of emails. Like, if I sent an email Monday morning, 90% of the time they wouldn't get back to me till Tuesday. The call didn't happen that week. And so I started to get better about making sure, like, I was really disciplined about sending them on Saturday or Sunday, because then they're responding before the end of the day Monday, and then maybe you did get the call that week. And if you get enough of those calls, now an outcome that would have happened a month later happens a month earlier. It makes a big difference.
How do you keep that up? So one of the things that used to piss me off a lot about him when we were building our first business, and now it pisses me off about a lot of other people, is people didn't have that sense of urgency. The thing I always love about Dave is, like you said, his list of 150 people, he'll talk to 300 before somebody talks to 3 people. It's just like, it's that grind. I have to imagine doing that for 6 years. There's a lot of times where maybe it's somebody you're dating at the time, or maybe it's a friend where you're like, a couple times maybe you're like, am I going to keep doing this, or am I going to like slack off a little bit? How do you stay in the game? And I say that because I think that, I see people like you, you guys are in the game. Like, I can't imagine either of you being off the game, but how do you stay in the game?
Like what you said before about that wonder and wisdom point, I think having the humility to recognize wisdom when it presents itself, but also preserving that wonder in the organization of, like, you are attracting dreamers in your organization, like whether they are the full-time co-founder you're looking for, or like they're just a, 20-something account manager who doesn't want to go in banking. They're all, to some extent, consistent about embracing that, like, combination of, they want it to be real, but they also want to be able to dream about this kind of forward-looking outcome that is not bound by conventional commercial constraints. And like, the only limitation of, being able to make that happen is in this room. And so I think from a, kind of operational discipline standpoint, we tried really hard to make sure that everybody had ownership of different categories for the business, such that, like, it wasn't all salespeople comparing sales numbers. Like, Brett was a great example where he was building, I was selling. So anything that required communicating to anybody, whether it's a third-party vendor, an investor, marketer, designer, et cetera, I was in charge of. Anything that required us building something from a deck to, a new feature on the website was him. And that harmony, I think, people appreciated from the outset. So when we brought in other people, they recognized that, like, they were going to own some subcategory within those two. And I'm a big believer in trying to keep it simple. Like, if you're not building it, you're selling it at a startup, in my view, whether it's a physical product, services, doesn't matter. And so I think a combination of, like, good delegation, but also, like, trust in, the other team member, they're going to get it done. And yeah.
Love that. If you're not building it, you're selling it. I love that. I think that's really, really sound advice.
I used to say that to you. I sell it, you smell it.
There was a lot of smelling, and it was kind of like
He got jealous. I was good at selling, and he had a lot of smelling to do, and he used to get really upset about it.
But then I started getting good at selling and realizing now I'm selling and I'm building, and it was like smelling bath salt, and I was going fucking crazy. Which leads us to the table we're at today. So no, that's great. So now what I'm hearing is like you're really good at this. Is like dig us into those inflection moments, those big scale moments. Dave, you're always great with
no, absolutely. So what did scale feel like when you started selling? So now you're building the marketplace, things are happening. Do you remember your first big sale? Like, what was a big sale? Like, when did scale start to happen?
Well, I can't necessarily remember that.
Did you fund
a moment scale happened, but I certainly remember like our first customer was Pepsi, and it was $25,000. And of course, going back to my identified days, like was just making it up. Like, what am I going to sell, right? And I think something that I've become very sensitive to, and I've heard a lot of other mentors speak to, is like you want to be on the cutting edge, but not so far on the bleeding edge that there's not budget for it.
Yeah.
Like if somebody's not in charge of, allocating $1 to help pull that objective forward, you're going to have a really hard time selling. And I think you see a lot of really innovative startups fail because they just can't get, budget timelines or like a clean sales motion where like there's some repeatability into, hey, we did this thing for Pepsi. You're kind of like Pepsi, and the person who signed this agreement's kind of like the person you are in terms of mandate. And so like we think that you guys should buy this product some percentage of the time. Yeah. And as basic as that is,
pattern recognition.
Yeah. Exactly.
With supply and demand at its most basic level, right?
Yeah. Were you selling to Pepsi direct or Pepsi's buying agency?
Direct. So that was...
You got to Pepsi direct.
Yes.
Wow.
Really good
Which
question.
is unusual.
Very unusual. And then from that moment on, we're like, well, if we got to them direct, maybe we can get to another brand direct.
Sure, agencies loved you at the time.
Yeah, Omnicom.
I was so naive. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to agencies because they're in the business of helping their clients. And I'm just going to go to one agency and they represent lots of brands. So it's going to be this like brand party and I'm just going to have to sell a few agencies. And it going back to the budget thing was interesting because they couldn't find a way to charge for QuickFrame, right? It wasn't just that they saw us as a threat, which like I think conceptually was true, but we were out there selling, a unit of value for 10 cents on the dollar and telling them that we could do it profitably and that they should be getting ahead of using that as like an additional asset in their broader tool set to help the client. But at the end of the day, I became sensitive to how creative agencies charge. And that is like not based on very explicit ROI, despite what any, creative agency owner would otherwise have you believe, at least in my experience. And so they had, really great value, I think, for the client insofar as like developing brand ethos, identity, communication strategy, et cetera. But we are not in the business of pricing per hour. Like we wanted to do more faster, and we felt like we could, bring demonstratable proof points that if you did that, you were going to be able to get more out of your marketing dollars. And so
they were BPH.
Yeah.
Bullshit per hour. That's the agency metric of choice.
Yeah. So you guys could say that because it's your show, but
yeah. And we also own an agency. And we get it. I mean, it's a difficult business. So from the first 50,000, did you sell and fund the business, or did you have to go back and raise money? Like what was the cadence of that? And if so, like how much money and all that kind of stuff?
So it was, fairly simultaneous.
Okay.
Communicated as such, but it was like going to sell Pepsi, going to sell an investor. Investors say want to see more Pepsis. I go try to sell more Pepsis. Go to meet another investor, just the numbers game that we talked about before, right? It's like maybe the next investor will be more interested in the product and gravitate more to, our roadmap and feature set versus the team versus, my ability to actually communicate what was needed over a, prolonged period of time, which I think was definitely one of the many weaknesses I had as a first-time entrepreneur. And so it kind of like the use of proceeds discussion blended with like the how much do I need to pay you, Brett discussion. There were definitely a lot of times where we were really close to running out of money, and then we would get some big deal. And we'd be like, hey, can you pay us 25% up front or whatever it was? And that teaches you about working capital dynamics and all the things that I thought weren't for me from an institutional finance standpoint, of course, like became unavoidable as a business owner.
Yeah.
Which of course is, the joke in the family, at least. It's like, eventually we all become finance people.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how it started. And
did you raise?
We did. Yeah. We never raised institutional capital. I was the board member throughout the history of the business, not so much as a dictator, but just more as like a function of operational necessity that like we needed to be able to make changes to, the cap table, issue stock, raise money.
So is this just rolling closes with different investors?
Yep, in the beginning. And just $50,000 checks, sometimes not even, depending on who the person was.
Wow.
We have like 100 people on the cap table and the deal closed. And it's just not something I'd recommend doing.
100 people? How many?
Including employees, but I would say like 30 investors easily would put up probably on average, 150 grand, not even.
Wow. So you raised about $3 million. Wow. You're a scrappy guy. I'm not gonna like I didn't picture you when you're like, I grew up here, went to this, I went to that. You are like a street. I mean, that's you're like a street level scrappy guy that has this like really buttoned up, process oriented, pretty refined upbringing in some cases, but yet all of your wins come from your tenacity and scrappiness, which is remarkable because it's a duality that I wasn't expecting.
Again, looking back, well, one, I appreciate that. But looking back, it's interesting to like reflect on, just how little I knew, right? It's like, I thought I was going to make a deck and go talk to 6 investors. And, I was like, I'm a tough enough guy. I can handle 3 saying like, you're an idiot. But surely 6 is enough. Like that took a lot of time to get all those meetings, get in front of them. This deck, cost me, $3,000, and that's 3 out of the 50 I have, and I've already paid 2 months for this developer. We're already behind on the product. Like you get in it immediately. And in many ways, I now look back on this as a blessing, but like, I just thought it was going to be really easy to raise institutional capital. It's like VCs are in the business of investing in startups. And then I realized like, that's not necessarily the case. And so I learned a lot about the fundraising sort of sequence or conveyor belt, right? Because it was really tough to go out and raise an A if you didn't have an institutional seed. And because no Series A people want to give us money, the moment that we were like past that stage as a business, just from a financial standpoint, and I often talk to entrepreneurs where I'm like, hey, they're not in the business of investing in the idea. They're in the business of like, cutting $1 million to $3 million check for 15 to 30% of your business.
Yeah, they want to work their way in.
It's like there's not this like, oh, well, we like it so much, we'll take 3%. Like those are real outliers. Like their core economic operating principles, like they need to allocate this very specific range of money to own this very specific range of the business on these very specific terms. And if you fit that, great. Like, they're really excited. But like, if you move past that, meaning like you blow through the valuation because your business just was, being run just based on the profits of, the operation. Well, now they can't cut a $3 million check for, 20% of your business.
Yeah.
And so even if we really like each other, like there were situations where I was like, oh, wow, I thought that like, as I got more real, it'd be easier for you to cut a check, but we actually got further away from them being able to do it. So they said no in the beginning, and that actually required us to build almost exclusively without institutional capital from then on, because then you get into like the growth equity, private equity world, and you better be able to stand on your own 2 feet at that point, because like maybe you're doing some secondary, but yeah, it's like a very different kind of, board, governance experience.
The other thing is that sadly, this is the case. Everybody's always so frustrated because you seem like a very confident person, despite being very humble at the same time. We always say horse or jockey, and the answer for all investors is jockey, and you're a first-time founder. So there's always the question of, will they see your ability to seek wisdom and all the stories that you're telling me of how you found experience and you found all these advisors across the channel from 20 to 80 years old as a incredible value? Will they see who you are as a first-time founder, which many of them just won't do? Some of them have a checkbox. First-time founder, no. It's like an instant no matter who you are, whether or not you went to fucking Wharton or Yale or anything. And then there are some people that, but now, because you exited, which we're about to move to, now you're not a first-time founder anymore, and you're incredibly experienced. So it kind of shows you that whole
chicken and the egg.
Yeah, it's frustrating as hell, especially when you're young, because I think young men, and I say this because I see it in my son, we just have this energy and this speed to us that we want to move fast and break things, and we think that the world is going to bend to that. And I think it's just rude awakening after rude awakening, but it does polish us into the shiny turds we become.
I love that. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So now, how big did you get before you got acquired in December of 2021, which we'll get to. How big were you when you got acquired? Talk to us about that.
The business was really healthy. We were lucky enough to do a fundraise. Again, like nothing institutional, but just larger angel checks. In the winter of 2019. And then obviously the world shut down.
Yeah,
in March. And like that was extraordinarily humbling because like you're trying to build something that's really difficult to do anyway. And now like all the grown-ups are like, we don't know what the hell's going on.
But you're lucky as hell that you got the money before before COVID.
Big time.
Yeah.
And, I was really lucky to have an amazing management team and partnership around me. And so really deferred to experience, which I didn't have then, from an operational standpoint. We had a great COO and CRO and just were really aggressive about getting back in the gym and cutting costs. And we had to, embrace the fact that we were going to have a lot of technical debt because like a lot of our use of proceeds called for meaningful improvements in the product, which were going to be difficult to justify in that economic environment. Cash conversion cycle went to shit. It was just like a really scary time, obviously. And clients were paying you never, the APL was frozen. Like it was just like, it was nuts.
The people don't realize the bigger the client, the longer the never becomes, right? The net never, Pepsi's, the Unilevers of the world, like they're like, oh yeah, we could totally pay you. You're a startup company, great. Can you do 120, 150, 180? Remember we got asked 180 one time?
Yeah,
net 180.
Totally, it's crazy. I was like, how are we going to run our money doubling revenue every year?
Yeah, they want you to be a bank.
You could run it totally. Yeah, and again, that's another learning category. Forget one thing.
Yeah.
Cracks me up though.
How many people did you have working for you at the time when you raised the capital?
75.
75. So you weren't scaling, or did you have to scale to build the product?
Well, that was the thing. We had all these aspirations, and I think we probably would have been a worse business had I greenlit a lot of the investments that we initially had planned. But instead, we cut some ancillary teams that we had just hired, gave them good for startup standard severance, and we focused exclusively on what was working. And gross profit doubled, revenue doubled, more than doubled. And so the business was, going to do over $25 million that year, which was again up from 12 the year before and, 5 the year before that and 3 the year that I was, that I raised that $3 million. And so, the process was largely like focus on client categories, become really measured about like what we're selling to who and why. Just as a manager, we had to be substantially more analytically oriented in terms of like measuring productivity. Like I was a big believer in just the softer things you recognize when you're in person. Like I love the building you guys have here. Like there's this really cool camaraderie feel, and I managed that way. Like if I was in the elevator with somebody, even if I didn't get to meet with them, I could sense if something was going on with that person and maybe they needed, a check-in, or if they were getting really late, or if they were staying really late, or they were bickering with team members. Like you just kind of sense this like
signal. Yeah.
Professional identity, I think that, you didn't obviously have in the COVID world. And so, how do we measure productivity in a world where I can't see people? And like, we need, not lagging indicators like sales. We need like leading indicators like, meeting frequency and all the other productivity metrics that a normal sales operation B2B sales operation would want to measure. But, again, it was deferring to partners and management who had more experience doing that kind of thing and kind of getting out of the way.
I'm curious about the pivot from raise money, pivot from growth to cut. Did you make that on your own? Did you make that with your management team? Was your advisors helping you to make that decision? Because it's that is a pivotal, you could have easily fucked that decision up.
Yeah.
How did that decision come to be?
Definitely the latter. Like I spoke to some of the investors who had just put money in, tried to gauge sort of like their appetite for more. They were like, look, first we need to assume this is the last money we've ever raised. And so I heard that loud and clear. Then the whole, now it seems so crazy, but then like the idea of like taking, several $1 million, if not more, from an investor, which would have been like the baseline of investment required for that stage of the business, with somebody you've never met, was such a crazy thing to me. And now inviting them to potentially join your board and like be in this sort of marriage that could last, anywhere from 5 years to forever. You don't know.
Yeah.
And so, that was one very sober message I had to hear loud and clear and help kind of, scare me into being open-minded and recognizing that like I didn't know what the future held. And I really felt before I had a really good command of like what the end of the year was going to look like roughly, at least for our ecosystem and for our business. And so COVID obviously put a wrench in that. And so deferring to management was like a big part of the philosophy around like, hey guys, what do we think? And everybody agreed that like we had to cut now, we had to cut more than we thought we needed because we didn't want to have to go back to the well. And we did all those things and it ended up working out and built a substantially stronger unit in doing so, like over time. And you guys remember that period. It wasn't just like sickness. It was like, Civil War and like
all the things.
Yeah. And so
how do you breathe morale back into your organization after you seemingly cut deep and had to lay off a number of people? Like, what was that like for you as a leader? I mean, I'm sure emotionally, unless you're a sociopath, it hurts, right?
Yeah.
How do you build back up morale? Because I think that's something that a lot of people, especially in this current environment, cost of capital rising, all the different things that we all know about. It's difficult. It's a question people get. So how do you build back morale when you have to make that hard choice of laying a number of people off?
I wish I had the right answer there. I can only tell you what we did, and we tried our best, but definitely no silver bullet. I mean, we were really honest, and we recognized people were scared. So like there was a baseline in which we shared, which is like these people are going to be okay. This is a really hard decision. It is not a reflection on who they are as people or their talent. And we probably suffered a bit as an organization from how much we shared. Like we were a little too close as a unit. There was like some familial stuff where like either be kind of brother or sister bickering. We did have like a median age employee, like 27, 28, who are exceptional, by the way, but they're still 27, 28-year-olds. And they're scared. And their family or parents are scared, or whoever they've kind of moved back in with or congregating with. And so I think the honesty helped them have conviction when there were really positive things to report on, that we weren't embellishing or like telling this other narrative. And you got to balance that, right? I'm a big believer that like, you don't want to come back and tell your kids like, I don't know how we're going to, pay our mortgage this month. Like there's a line, but at the end of the day, you still want them to be able to believe what you say, and you can't do that unless you're honest. And so we tried really hard to just over communicate. We had a daily check-in for a little bit, then that moved to a weekly check-in. We were pretty good for our size about having monthly corporate meetings where like I would open, talk about what's going on in the business. And then we had different department heads lead different reporting. And so I think that sort of ceremony helped create some habit, which helped create some comfort.
Nice.
And then we, of course, like tried a few COVID get-togethers, which were like, massive failures, but like people appreciated them. And it just felt like everybody was trying to figure it out together and actually brought together. I don't necessarily know if it was like everybody having a blast, but it definitely refreshed a concerted effort to grow the business. And like I was focused on growth, but I was not relentless about like squeezing out every cent of profitability in the business before then. After then, everybody was aligned on like, this is our oxygen. If we don't want the person to the left or the right of us, let alone ourselves being cut, here's the number that makes us, really commit to that. And I will say that I was skeptical about sharing those types of metrics with the entire team, just for fear of missing, and then you're, really up a creek. But deferred to my management team, they were right again, and the group really rallied around it. And you'd hear them talk about their own individual business lines or clients or product features within that context. Like, hey, I think we can count on this amount of profitability for this kind of product. And that became the basis for how to discuss things and debate things internally, which was substantially more objective and analytically oriented than what we had done previously.
Totally. Huge fan of open book management. I think that you talk about conviction, but I just think that owner mindset that people start to step into when they understand the realities, not just for themselves, but like you said, to the left and to the right, there's just a sense of shared camaraderie that I've seen kind of rise up in those times. So I appreciate you sharing that.
You're so right about the shared ownership piece. Like that's it. It's like, how can we get more people to feel like this is theirs and just getting out of the way?
Amen.
So now coming out of COVID, things are improving, I'd imagine, but you're also burning hot. right? You got some cash issues
We were managing them, but we couldn't do this forever.
Yeah.
We were not stacking dollar bills like from a net income standpoint, but the productivity metrics were all trending in the right direction. Again, another aggressive growth year where we cut costs. So just like all the flow through financials looked really good. And, there was parts of the business, from a working capital standpoint that weren't great, but the ABL kind of loosened up. And so we were able to manage, or at least around those. We couldn't really recruit or be crazy aggressive about big strategic moves we would have otherwise wanted to make. But because we hadn't raised a lot of money, we were growing really quickly, and we had this like really lean organization. We had sort of this trifecta of like, well, we're going to have a bunch of actual institutional financial interests, but we also might consider selling to a strategic just because, who knows what the broader macro environment's going to look like.
Yeah.
Negative interest rates can't go on forever. And we know what the road ahead could look like, which is you're going to have to raise a bunch of money and might have to build for another decade.
You got that right. Yeah.
Again, defer to
interest
the
rates
team.
are not negative no more.
No, totally. So,
what was the process like of figuring out the institutional or the strategic?
So we had some soft strategic interest just from like existing client partners, channel partners. Like a big part of our business were like resellers. Like close to a third of our business was like a social platform or like a CTV OEM who'd be like, hey, we're going to refer you brands. You're going to make CTV assets for them. And we just want the media revenue because they don't have something that's optimized for streaming or optimized for social. And so that was good business for us. And so that prompted, okay, maybe we should actually go about hiring an advisor. And the banks were like, having a freaking field day. They were loving it. And so we took a few pitch meetings. All the pitches reflected enterprise value estimates, which like, even with caveats being like what they were, we were still like, shit, like it'd be hard for me to turn down.
Sure.
And so my partners, again, being the blissfully heavy-handed partners that they were like, hey dude, like you turn this down, like I'm turning on you basically. Like, and you had to listen to your partners. And I mean, at least that's obviously been a big thread throughout my career, is just trying to get smarter about that balance. And I went to the group. I was like, look, if we're going to do this, like we have to be all in on this. And so we basically drew straws and we're like, hey, who's in? And everybody agreed that like we'd be silly if we can get the kind of estimate that we could get from an advisor to not entertain the strategic route, given that we hadn't raised any institutional capital. We were growing at the rate that we were. And it was going to take a lot more money for us to grow the right way beyond that sort of $25, $30 million top line figure. Mm-hmm. And so we hired a bank, solicited a lot of different buyers, went through that whole process. Who knows how typical it is today, but like in COVID, it was like wildly stressful. A lot of management meetings, follow-up meetings, diligence meetings.
What was happening to the business while that was happening?
It was rough. And I think, thank God, we had overshared what we did in the beginning of COVID, because that 27, 28-year-old account manager like had real economic responsibility that they had to maintain without really any of the help of management. Because like,
you guys were
my partners, were like more or less gone. And it's one thing when you can see your boss. Like I remember they'd be able to see me in a meeting raising money, and it's like they know that fundraising is happening. But when they're just flipping the Zoom open on their pajamas, like, in the same room with 3 other 27-year-olds, like trying to like talk over each other on their calls to keep their job in the pandemic, like I felt for them too. And they really stepped up, and I knew it couldn't go on forever, but like, we were like, look, we're going to go right, you go left. If you can hold your shit together, like for this period of time, like it's going to work. And they did.
Amazing. And now I don't know too much about Mountain Digital except for the Ryan Reynolds tie-in, because, I feel like Ryan Reynolds is like King Midas. Anything he touches turns to gold. But so those were ultimately the acquirer, right?
Yeah. Mountain Digital bought QuickFrame and Ryan Reynolds agency.
Understood. So I have to ask, just for the audience,
Sure.
How involved is someone like a Ryan Reynolds in a business like that versus like, when said celebrity, Justin Timberlake, whoever gets, creative director blessed by Budweiser. I remember back in the day, like,
and Jake Paul, the co-founder type bullshit.
Yeah. Like how involved? I mean, like, do you find yourself in rooms with him?
He authors, first of all, his team and who he's put around him are exceptional. And so, I think that helped from the outset for us, because we didn't know what to expect, right? You hear the celebrity, of course, you've seen him in the movies, and to your point, everything does touch, turn to gold, but you don't know what you're getting necessarily if you're like just normies like we were, or, and so we were really taken back by the sophistication and like curiosity from his team. And he relies on them a lot. And so they really took over all broader PR communications, all creative. You'll see a lot of those, campaigns which reflect, not just TV spots, but like invariably a lot of like really well thought out demonstrations and use cases, all talking about the future of performance TV.
Yeah.
And so I will say like the Mountain Digital executive team has done a really good job of like bringing them into the fold. And going back to my initial, sort of explanation about team building, like I really appreciate, and I think the team did, having this like very eclectic diversity of backgrounds and skill sets, where like you had these conventional TV minds and entertainment minds doing B2B SaaS marketing and communicating a future medium that like doesn't really exist yet, right? Streaming is still very much in its earliest days. And so it was the combination of like a startup video software business and a creative agency that is, owned by one of the most successful entertainer, celebrities out there. And then you've got this like programmatic platform to buy performance television. And you're like, a lot of customers were just confused. And so that curiosity in and of itself was like a really great way to grow the business. And I think they'll have a lot of success over the years because of it.
Fantastic.
So we never ask, unless it's public record, what the exit was for. But I do like to ask, because I think it's a topic of discussion for a lot of entrepreneurs that are either exited, have new businesses or what have you, was what was the makeup of the exit in terms of, cash up front, stock, earn out, like all that kind of stuff. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we traded a premium. It was a lower middle market deal, which was rich for all of our investors, still modest within the scope of, Mountain's valuation. And certainly within the scope of what we felt like we could deliver on from a revenue standpoint, even, with the integration being what a lot of integrations are, which is sometimes, messy and confusing. And so the trade was for a higher premium for deferred cash or stock. So you get 100% choice. Like every shareholder could say whether they wanted all cash or whether they wanted half stock and half cash.
Mm-hmm.
Mountain didn't want to part with more than half stock.
Mm-hmm.
For reasons that are, specific to the fundraise that they were doing concurrently. And so long as, I think that many shareholders had the choice, that was a big thing for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, hey, look, I don't want people to make any decision that is for any other reason than like what they want to do.
Yeah.
Because you got to be eyes open about the equity value, and also like, hey, we're handing the keys over.
Yeah. Choice in agency is everything.
100%. And it's, I think different when, for better, for worse, like, reinforcing them like, look, guys, we're handing the keys over, we're not in control anymore. And so like in the way that I used to say, look, I really feel like next quarter we're going to be able to do this, that, and your investment is going to be safe. Even though you're joining a larger organization with presumably stronger operational rigor, at the end of the day, you're along for a ride that I'm not in control of. And that was like a big difference and distinction I wanted to set at that moment when you hand the keys over, because it doesn't really feel like that right away.
Yeah.
But over time, you start to realize that like, oh yeah, it's not mine anymore.
I'm a cog again.
Mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I asked this question. It's become a thing when the wire drops, right? So like there's everybody's got a different story. Can you go back and reflect on December 2021 when Mountain Digital bought you and whatever your deal was? I'd imagine there's some type of a wire or a contract signing. What was that like for you? What did you feel like? What was the next? Walk us through that day and the next 5.
So I won't comment on the particulars of the merger structure, although there's like a lot of, I think, underappreciated value that comes in like the type of mergers that C corps enter into. I'm a big believer in like being really open-minded about corporate structure for startups, especially ones which don't have plans of taking institutional capital. And I'm like very sensitive to like my own naivete around like, I'm just going to go make it a Delaware C corp and like go raise VC money. And it certainly works out that way for some. But the majority of businesses that could be extraordinarily, beneficial, commercially speaking, and valuable and profitable could be skinned lots of different ways and built lots of different ways. And so you kind of reverse engineer December 31st on the eve of New Year's, trying to get into the Delaware Chancellery Court to get them to bless your merger. It's a little bit like being like, hey, if I don't get my license here at the DMV by 4:00, like they're going to close the doors and there's nothing we can do about it. And so like that whole process of like getting signatures by certain time zones. And I mean, it was extraordinarily stressful. And again, you never really knew that. I was just like, I assumed that like, two companies want to merge. This is how they're going to do it. And two lawyers get together and there's people for that. Like now you're telling me that like, our lawyer's stuck in traffic getting to the Delaware court and is going to have to go wait in a physical line in a physical building with like, an extraordinarily antiquated bureaucratic process, and like the whims of our entire financial future rest on that. Like, I thought twice about, do I tell that to my significant other? Do I just, go for a walk again? Like that was crazy. And I think for both sides as well, for the buyer as well. So that all worked out. But again, in the spirit of learning, not something that I knew going in by any stretch. And I forget the first part of your question.
So like when the wire hits.
Yeah,
I think the deferred piece helped that. Like we didn't have as many like, we had a lot of like talking about it, and then like as you wait, several quarters for like each installment to hit, I think there's a little bit more
slow digestion.
Yes, slower digestion, which I've heard is a bit more beneficial. Whereas like I'm sure if the low would have been complemented by the high on December 31st that night, like there probably wouldn't be as much money in the bank right now.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, like as somebody who, I mean, like I had $1,100 in my bank account. Like I had for real, I had nothing. And my significant other, we drove down to Miami, sight unseen. She was pregnant. We're still unmarried. She's going to kill me for going through this. But just a hardcore, like, it's got to be this. Yeah, it's got to be this. Yeah, he's
so you're going through this while she was pregnant?
Yeah.
2, congrats.
Congrats, my son just turned 2.
It's crazy that
together.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. I got 2, 4, and 14, so I got a whole mess of them.
That's a fun.
Yeah.
You said 2, 4, and 14.
2, 4, and 14.
Oh my God,
yeah,
that's so fun.
Yeah, no, it is, and also his wife's the same. It's also like a nightmare too, because you've got terrible 2s. I've got a boy with all this crazy energy. I've got a 14-year-old teenage girl.
Oh.
I'm starting a new company right now, so I'm in fundraise mode. So all the stresses, and then the stresses of parenthood and all that. So it's like, I think people underestimate that, especially staff and employees. They don't really, because they look at it, for some reason, there's no humanity at the top.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a lot of cases.
Well, I'll say corporate overlords.
Yeah. We're just like capitalist pigs that are trying to make money, but they don't realize that you got a pregnant wife at home and $1,100 in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
But for you, that you're the business owner of a 75-person, 80-person company.
Yeah.
How many? So it's been 2 years now since you exited.
Mm-hmm.
How does it feel to be an employee again?
I think in the beginning it felt great, just because all the things that you haven't felt in a long time, like not stressing about running out of money, it kind of being somebody else's problem. You're still an owner, but like part of what you're also trying to set an example for as the founder is deference, right? It's like, hey, I want to demonstrate that I can be a follower as well. And I don't think you can lead unless you can also follow. And I think demonstrating that reciprocal skill set was something that like I tried to be as heavy-handed about, since there was no physical office. So like really trying to, explain to the team that, we were here to do as we were told, but that didn't mean that we were, cubicle monkeys, right? Like we still wanted to be creative. We still want to be hardworking. We still want to be passionate, but that we had to appreciate that we had sold the business.
Yeah. Humility is an important characteristic, I think, of any leader. So I think I appreciate the humility that you've demonstrated, and I think a lot of people will appreciate as well, because clearly you're a builder, right? So there's no question in my mind that, it didn't matter how much, you did or didn't walk away with, again, all your business, not ours, but you strike me as there's no amount of transaction that is going to let that brain of yours rest, right? You're going to be planning some kind of party, whether that party's a new business or something.
That was my next question.
What's next for you?
What's the next office for you?
You're right. No, it's another better party. right? And I think, being increasingly sensitive to what better means, which like in the beginning, and at least my naivete, you like assume it's all money, but you go through the process and part of what you thought you would be yearning for, which is like this reprieve from responsibility, is what you start to yearn for again. And the cost of responsibility is risk. Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, well, the truth is, it goes back to those retirees. It's like they just miss being in the game. And I miss being in the game and, solving the problems that I choose to solve with the people I choose to solve them with is like a really, I think, understated blessing. And probably it might be the best part about being an entrepreneur that goes, I think, unnoticed often.
Yeah.
And so like you're reminded of that pretty quickly when like you can't hire an intern anymore.
Yep.
You got a fancy title, but like,
got to contact HR and submit a request for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we've both, I always tell people that I'm unemployable, I think, at this point, because it's one of those things where all of my closest friends are all entrepreneurs and business builders, right? So even if I was, sitting on Warren Buffett money at this point, which I'm not, but even if I was, I think, I'd be sitting around the table with my closest friends and they're telling me about this one just raised this one's building this one's doing this thing for whatever this widget is. And I'm like, I just don't think that I could turn that part of my brain off no matter what. So I appreciate that, and also appreciate the time today. I think you've shared a lot of lessons with folks. Thanks so much for coming on to Forward Obsessed. How do folks go? This is the time to plug. Like, clearly you're scheming on the next party. How do folks go to follow you, learn about the stuff that you're up to?
Don't wrap up yet. I just got one last question. All right. If you can share with us, like, what excites you? Like that crazy instigator, like, what are you instigating right now? Like, what in your mind? I know you're still at Mountain, but I'd imagine that you're restless. I'd imagine that you got this certain things that are piquing your interest again. Like, you think you're going to be in the same industry? You're going to go after media, like, or do you think you're going to be, open a coffee shop and be a barista?
We've had our guests, by the way.
Yeah, that's why I said that. We had.
If I knew, it's funny you mentioned the barista example, because I wouldn't hold your breath about me becoming a barista. Can barely make a good cup of coffee, so it's a very pertinent example. But I have spent a lot of time thinking about like the type of capital requirements for the next thing and the implications on the kind of business you go into. And going back to like one of my favorite classes at Wharton, it's called The Legal and Transactional Aspects of Entrepreneurship. It's taught by like the Wharton entrepreneur, Ben Graham, Bob Borghese, who's like exceptional. He's been a mentor of mine, attorney and partner for a long time, but he's just an amazing teacher. And he basically opens the class with these different examples of different kind of businesses and the capital requirements and says, how much do you think this person made? How much do you think this person made? And, one guy's like a cherry tomato farmer. Another guy sells Gatorades outside Home Depot, cash only. Another guy's like started a gaming currency marketplace, whatever. And the answer in the class is always sort of LLC, but it comes back to like, if I'm going to start something, I want to be able to know I can finish. And like, as opposed to what I did in the beginning, which is like, I'm just going to go one foot in front of my other and just not stop. Probably not really knowing exactly where I'm going. I want to actually architect like, okay, what do I want my lifestyle to be like? And how beholden do I want to be to third-party capital? Because that's going to constrain the idea and help direct the idea. And so I've been thinking about like, do I want to open, quote, real businesses like the barista and like be accountable to just myself and the employees and self-fund? Or do I, want to go to the scalable software thing again, and that's going to require third-party capital, and what does that look like? And I haven't really figured it out yet, to be totally honest. But it's definitely that comparison, which is like, do I go raise the institutional capital and build for, a $100 million plus opportunity, which you kind of have to, or do you want to expense your whole life, have a smaller operation, cash flow, grow organically?
And AI is not going to replace the barista.
AI is not friggin' replace. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And I'm a coffee snob despite not being able to make coffee. So,
so Pete. Yeah. All right. So now, how do people keep in touch with you? Are you on social? If anybody wants to reach out to you from the show, if you're accepting reach outs, feel free to plug to the camera, share any information you may want.
Yeah, I'm I'm definitely open to sharing my personal email. It's just lastname.lucas@gmail. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, not nearly as much as I used to be when we were, posting on behalf of clients, et cetera. And I'm very open to networking. I've had an amazing time on this show. I'm really excited for what you guys have going on here. Just touring the facility is amazing. And so, I'm obviously a viewer, follower, and will continue to do so, but I'm very open to, blind reach out and yeah, that's it. Not
Be careful. You're going to get 1,000 of you calling.
No, call away. Believe me. I'm always looking for new ideas and new people in the network and new people to learn from. And this has been awesome.
Thanks so much for coming on Forward Obsessed. And as always, for the audience, thanks so much for tuning in. And please, please, please don't forget to like and subscribe and give us a 5-star review. We appreciate that and helps us get continually awesome people on the show like we've had today. So thanks again.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Forward Obsessed. Please share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app. This episode was hosted by Pete Senna and David Salinas from the Digital Surgeons Podcast Studio in New Haven, Connecticut. Special thanks to our AV crew, Steve Walter and Meg Olson. Forward Obsessed is produced by Robert Roach. If you'd like to contact our team, visit us at forwardobsessed.com.